Hi, okay. This is your Monday lesson, and this lesson is a little bit odd or confused, maybe because I'm still not entirely recovered from my trip up to visit you, because it was very exhausting. 2 hours of ice skating is not usual for me, and then quite intense, complicated conversations and even strange arguments and emotional outbursts means that it's been a couple of days of trying to recuperate. And so I have a lesson planned which has to do with repeating patterns. That series of repeating patterns can be found on all kinds of things like modern day, excuse me a second, like modern day pottery, which has this band around it, and this kind of band of decorative stripes and images can be found 2,000 years ago on Greek pottery. Its origin tends to be in the fact that if you remember your time at your mother's art school at 183, down in the cellar, there were pottery wheels. People would throw pots, and I bet you saw people sitting at a pottery wheel kicking a circular thing, and the plate would go around. There'd be a wad of clay on it. The clay would be spinning, and if you were to just touch an instrument to the pot as it spun, it would give a groove all the way around. And if you touched it with a paintbrush, or glaze is what they call it when you put on pottery, just touch it to the pot, it'll paint a stripe all the way around it in an instant. You don't even have to do anything except hold your hand still. And also, if you were to take the paintbrush or a tool that would gouge a little clay out and just go up and down, it would put an S-curve. And those shapes, S-curves and like that, have always existed on pottery, and it has become a thing of such constant use that over the years there's practically no society that doesn't use repeating patterns, simple patterns, to create decorations on everything. Clothing, people's faces, of tattoos. However, before we get into the assignment and what you're going to do, or what I'm going to try and ask you to do, I want to talk about a conversation that I felt was very important that we had about, where's that paper, about skullduggery pleasant. I said to you this, I said, when you write, I said, the things that you read, are you influenced by the things that you read? And is there anything of skullduggery pleasant in your writing picked up from the fact that you read these books and these ideas are in you? And you said, no. You said, I don't exactly remember your words, but you said that your books were not like skullduggery pleasant. I said to you this, I said, tell me what skullduggery pleasant is like, his writing. And so you opened your iPad and you were playing a video game, and you started to explain to me what skullduggery pleasant books were like. And you talked for quite a time. You talked for like a couple minutes, if I remember, and I interrupted you. And I said, when you're speaking, I said, actually what I said is, are you just saying this? Or are you reading something off of your screen? Because it sounds like you're reading a description that somebody wrote about skullduggery pleasant, like a review in an article. He said, no, I'm just telling you what it is. And I said, but you're speaking in sentences and paragraphs. That's very unusual for somebody to answer a question with complete sentences and paragraphs. And you said, no, it's not, because that's how people talk, don't they? They talk in paragraphs and sentences. That was the end of that conversation, but I had more to say about that. Here's what I wanted to say about that. No, in my opinion, people do not talk in sentences and paragraphs. Generally, if you listen to conversations, people at best talk in sentences, and people reply in sentences, and even more so, most people don't even talk in sentences, but they talk in sentence fragments, hoping that they'll be understood by their listeners. So, that got me thinking about how in a written work you deal with conversation. And I want to point out the difference between speaking in paragraphs, which I do, and you know I do, and you refer to it as my lecturing, because it's true, I lecture. When I lecture, that means, like right now, I speak in long sentences and I speak in paragraphs, and my paragraphs end up being organized into complete essays sometimes. But you have a tendency at times to do that also if you are asked a question. But you're not like me, who does it automatically as if it's part of the nature of the way I think and speak. Now, let's take an example of your writing. This is from, I think it's called The Future. This is the character Josh Brown. It's in the first person, so therefore, in the first person, the words are said by the person, the character. So this is Josh Brown, this is him speaking. Freedom Day, never my favorite day. The anniversary of the death of democracy for one thing. For another, the only day I have to wear anything other than football uniform, and to make matters worse, I have to walk. Now, what do we have here? This is sentences and paragraphs. But he's not saying it to anyone. He's thinking it. So these words represent his thoughts in his head. But think to yourself, as you go on, he's about to probably, as you develop this story, if you do, he's about to talk to the character Brooke Miller. Now, if he talks to Brooke Miller, would he say any of this in paragraphs? No. When you look at any presentation of conversation, you'll notice on the page that the page gets light, because there's lots less words in conversation. Like in a play, the page of a play is very white because each person says only a few words. So what if there was a conversation, like sometimes happens between you and I, between two people, and one talks in paragraphs, and one talks in sentences or short phrases? What would that seem like? Well, it just so happens that the writer that I often mention to you, which I know that you don't know really anything about, is Dostoevsky. His most famous work is Crime and Punishment. In that book, there is an interesting conversation between a 50-year-old or over 50-year-old man who's an alcoholic, and he's in a bar, and he's in a kind of like a lot of trouble, and he's kind of upset about things. And he meets a stranger, and the stranger is a young college student, or actually a dropout, like a very smart boy, who is going to be the main character of the story. He's like maybe 20 years old. He's good looking, but he's a loner, and he very seldom talks to people. And these two strangers get involved in a conversation. And it's very revealing about you'll see a lot of things, because I'm going to read it to you before I give you this assignment, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about right now. Dostoevsky. This is a conversation between two characters. One is Raskolnikov, the main character of the story, and the other is called Marmaladov. And Marmaladov is an important character throughout the book, but he's introduced on this page. By the way, people who study this book point out that what Marmaladov's name really means is marmalade, the jelly, because he was intended to seem like a buffoon, a silly or sort of oddball old drunken character. Here we go. He was a man already past 50, of average height and solid build, with some gray in his hair and a large bald spot, with a yellow, even greenish face swollen from constant drinking, with puffy eyelids behind which his reddish eyes shone tiny as slits but lively. Yet there was something very strange in him. His eyes seemed even to be lit with rapture. Perhaps there was a sense and reason as well, but at the same time there seemed to be a flicker of madness in them. He was dressed in an old, completely ragged black coat which had shed all of its buttons. Only one still managed to hang on, and this one he kept buttoned, obviously not wishing to shirk convention. From under his nankeen waistcoat, a shirt front stuck out, all crumpled, soiled, and stained. His face had been shaved in official style, but a good while ago, so that thick gray bristles were beginning to show on it, and there was indeed something solidly official, like a government official, about his ways. He was agitated, he ruffled his hair, and every once in a while leaned his head on his hands in anguish, resting his torn elbows on the spit upon sticky table. Finally, he looked straight at Raskolnikov and said loudly and firmly, "May I venture, dear sir, to engage you in a conversation of decency? For though you are not of important aspect, my experience nevertheless distinguishes in you an educated man, one unaccustomed to drink, and I myself have always respected education, coupled with the feelings of the heart, and moreover, I am a titular counselor, Marmaladov, such is my name, titular counselor. May I venture to ask whether you have been in government service?" So, here's Marmaladov speaking in long sentences and paragraphs, because Dostoevsky wants to show you that there's something wrong with this guy. Raskolnikov answers, "Not studying," the young man replied, surprised. Two-word response to a paragraph. Partly at the peculiarly ornate turn of speech, and partly at being addressed so directly, point blank. In spite of his recent momentary wish for at least some communion with people, at first a word actually addressed to him, he suddenly felt his unusual, unpleasant, irritable feeling of loathing towards any stranger who would touch or merely wanted to touch his person. Here's Marmaladov then. "A student then, or a former student," the official cried. "Just as I thought. Experience, dear sir, oft-repeated experience," and he put his finger to his forehead in sign of self-praise. "You were a student, or engaged in some scholarly pursuit. Allow me." He rose slightly, swayed, and picked up his little crock and glass and sat himself down with the young man, somewhat catty-corner to him. He was drunk, but spoke loquaciously and glibly, only now and then getting a bit confused in places and dragging out his speech. He even fell upon Raskolnikov with a sort of greediness, as though he too had not talked to anyone for a whole month. Now, here's where I want to interject a comment about myself. I am a person who doesn't speak to anyone for a month at a time. And so consequently, often when I'm talking to you, I become Marmaladov, because you become the object, like Raskolnikov, of a person who will listen to me go on and on and on. And the reason is because I often have a lot to say and no one to say it to. So there's a similarity in this presentation of these two characters, of a sense that I am similar to Marmaladov and you are similar to Raskolnikov. "My dear sir," he began, almost solemnly, "poverty is no vice. That is the truth. I know that drunkenness is also no virtue, but that is even more so. But destitution, my dear sir, destitution is a vice. In poverty, you may still preserve the nobility of your inborn feelings, but in destitution, no one ever does. For destitution, one does not even get driven out of human company with a stick, but one is swept out with a broom. To make it more insulting, and just so, for in destitution, I am first to insult myself. Hence the drinking, my dear sir. A month ago, Mr. Lebesnikov gave my wife a beating. My wife is a very different thing from me. Do you understand, sir? Allow me to ask you something else, if only for the sake of curiosity. Did you ever happen to spend your night on the Neva, it's a river, on a hay barge? No, never, Raskolnikov replied. Why do you ask? So here we have from Raskolnikov a 5-word response. Well, sir, that's where I've come from, and it's already the 5th night. Now, the Neva is a river in Russia, and a hay barge would be a barge, a boat, that transports hay. So what he's saying is he's a homeless man. Actually, he has a home, but he can't go there because he's a drunk, and his wife will beat him and pull him around by the hair. He poured himself a glass, drank it, and lapsed into thought. Indeed, one could see bits of hay stuck here and there on his clothes, and even in his hair. It was quite possible that he had not undressed or washed for 5 days. His hands were especially dirty, greasy, red, with black under the nails. His conversation seemed to... So that is enough. What I'm trying to say is, speaking in paragraphs is rare. You do it, not because you're a drunkard. You do it appropriately to answer questions. In other words, you do it in a scholarly way, believe it or not, to answer questions that are put to you. And I do it out of compulsion, because I often will talk at length, unexpectedly, and you'll say to me, Richard, stop lecturing. And I think, stop lecturing. So that's all I wanted to say about that, because that's what I've been thinking about it. And I wanted to introduce you to my favorite author. And I chose that roundabout and sort of tricky way to broach the subject. Now the assignment. Now I've used up most of my time. But when I was at your house, I kept asking about those sticks. Who owns the biggest stick? And it belonged to Cameron. And then there was a middle-sized stick and a small stick. And I liked all those sticks, and I was talking about the idea of decorating them. And that idea of decorating sticks comes from this, and here is one that I did. I did this stick 20 years ago. I still have it, and I consider it kind of magical. I don't know what I consider magical, I don't know. Sticks like this grow all over the place, but when they're new, I mean on the tree, this bark is green. It's a bright green with little dots in it. And it has the characteristic that if you take a jackknife and you put it on the bark and you turn it twice, you can put your nail under the bark and peel it off. And it makes it very easy to peel off patterns, so you can make stripes, you can make triangles, and you can make zigzags, but only very simple shapes that can be done with a jackknife at the tip of the jackknife. Now, when I used to make these, we used to fool around with these, and we used to call them shamanism sticks. In other words, a magic stick, a stick that you could summon powers with, or keep away bad things, or make things happen or make things not happen. Because of course, the origin of this for me is childhood. Because the first shamanism sticks I ever made I was like 12. So I was at camp, Boy Scout camp, because my scout teacher was the one who showed me how to do this. So when I was at your house, I said, what I wanted you to do is find a stick, paint it white, paint patterns on it, and make it into a shamanism stick. I made one yesterday to show you. Here is a brand new shamanism stick that I made yesterday. I took a stick, there's no bark on it. Now I have to interrupt this to say, if you get a stick, and I don't want you to use those 3 special ones, but find a stick. But if you have to take the bark off, I know that you know this, but I have to say it being a responsible teacher. When you take bark off a stick, the hand goes back here and the knife up here, and never the other way around. And always never change direction, because you'll cut yourself. And even better, just to be safe, put a pot holder on your left hand if you're cutting, on your right hand if you're cutting with your left hand. So if you happen to do that. I know you know that and have been told it before. So I want you to paint a stick white. And then I want you to paint patterns, the simplest possible. Here I have a series of triangles, an up and down line, a black form with white dots in it, up and down dots, tails. And you can use a very small, your finest blue-green paintbrush that I saw there was very in good condition. But if you really want to do a simple version, you can use, after it's painted white, you can use a magic marker. And so we'll see things like this, a series of dots, this, all the way around, this, this, or this with white in the center. And as you go along, I would like you to notice something. That's a kind of a pattern, but when you go back and combine them, they become more elegant and more effective. So for example, having done this so far, if I combine these two and these, and if I combine this and combine this with that, I can create, after a while, a pattern in which the black shapes function as the design and the white shapes also function as a design. Because when these are effective, when you look at this, you could say it's white shapes on a black ground. Or you could say it's black shapes on a white ground, or it's white shapes on a black ground. That's called a figure ground relationship. Then I finished it off this way. On the top you'll see a piece of string. It's the kind of string appropriate to and similar to the look of a primitive or a magical type object, because it's a hemp-like string. It looks like it's old. You have some of the string. If you think back, at Christmas, I gave you the book on Rome. It was wrapped in hemp. That's this. You unwrapped it and you said, I like this hemp, this string, I'm going to keep it. Did you keep it? Because if you kept it, I'd like you to use it on this. And then, how did I attach it? Glue stick the ends to the stick. Then this red is the remains of, no, that's rubber band. It's the remains of this stuff that I was making the darts with. I said I was going to leave it, but I wanted to keep it, so I took it home. But you still have the purple string like this, and you also have the blue that I left on the kitchen table. Therefore, wrap it to end off. That will hold the bands that make the handle. And to finish off the thread, dip the very end of the thread in a little bit of glue so that when you bring it around the last time, it'll stay. So, a shamanism stick is your assignment for Friday. And I hope you, and so you can do it with a paintbrush, you can do it with a magic marker, and talk to you on Friday.